Great day. As I walk out, I think maybe we ought to talk a little bit about these spawning shoals. So this is kind of unique for bass. This is something more common for broadcast spawners like suckers or walleye or trout, who make the reds, or salmon that also build nests and congregate in large numbers. This is pretty unique. No other black bass that we know of does this to this degree. Some research at Oklahoma State University has found aggregation behavior in Neosho bass, formerly Neosho smallmouth bass, now its own species, but not to the degree of this, where we have like 90% of this population spawning in a single large shoal. And it's a large one, it's at least a mile long, but still, you might suspect that if you're a bass species or a bass population and most of you spawn in one area, that area could be very important for conservation, and you would be right. Protecting spawning shoals is probably one of the top priorities in maintaining this species. Identifying them and then protecting them. We knew about this one. We've identified some of them in another stream nearby. In the Flint, we kind of know where they spawn. There's a lot more habitat in the Flint. Spawning shoals are probably more important in these smaller tributary streams and rivers, because very often they have only one or two, maybe three big shoals, and that's it, because they're not that big of a system. And so if something happens to one of those shoals, you can imagine it would be a major hit on the species. And we think that this is probably one of the things that has happened to this fish through legacy effects of smaller dams that were commonly put on these streams. And fact is that where people tended to want to put dams, especially back in the days before you were using large-scale equipment, and concrete and all of that, they often used shoals as the foundation for these mill dams. I mean, nature's provided you a foundation. Why wouldn't you use it? If you're building mill dams and you're preferentially putting them on top of shoals, then you are in fact actually destroying portions of the shoal bass habitat. And all of this well predates us knowing anything about this species, before we even knew it was a species. And so knowing or having any idea whatsoever of what the possible effects of this on the species is pretty much impossible for us to know. So it seems likely that, the beginning of degradation of shoal bass in the Chattahoochee Basin very specifically, because it has always held more people than the Flint Basin, at least Europeans. There was a sizable Native American population in the Flint Basin. More than likely, the mill dams that were built extensively in the fall line region of the Chattahoochee Basin, which is where most of these shoals were found, probably was the beginning of decline for the species. But since they were modest dams and only covered small portions of the shoals, there's no reason to think that any more than a small decline of the species occurred. But it was the start. And as more people moved in, as technology got better, as we became an industrial nation, the size of the dams increased, the size of the reservoirs behind them increased, and the amount of shoals lost also increased. And also the dams started being built on the main stem of the Chattahoochee River, so blocking migration to some shoals and covering others. So spawning shoals are obviously a major component of preserving shoal bass. There aren't really any dams to worry about. If anything, we're taking them out. Building more is unlikely, but there are other things. Now, this particular property here, the gentleman that owned this property was very concerned that it would turn into a subdivision, since it has a beautiful shoal with spider lilies blooming on it. Be a very popular or attractive place to build houses, and that has its own problems, sedimentation and nutrient enrichment and all of that. So he actually willed his land to the Nature Conservancy, and that will never happen here. That is a fantastic gesture, probably one of the more significant things that has happened to the benefit of shoal bass, certainly since I've been working on them. But the fact is that shoal bass spawning shoals are a critical part of keeping this fish in decent population sizes that, you know, preserves the species going forward outside of the Flint River, which remains a stronghold for the species with lots of shoals, and a rural watershed that's probably not changing anytime soon. But someday it could start being attractive for people to live there, so you cannot rule it out. But the bottom line is that spawning shoals are very important. We have data from the Flint River in particular that suggests that once the fish spawn and leave, the little guys stay in those shoals probably for as much as a year. They are big eaters of insects and other macroinvertebrates at that age, really all the way up until they're about age 2 or 3. And that shoal area is a great place for bug production. So they're important not just as for spawning substrate and spawning population size, but also for recruitment and survivability of the young fish into adults. So they're awesome places to fish, obviously, and they're a ball to come and do what I did today. But they're much more than just a fishing place. They are critical habitat for the preservation and persistence of this fish, particularly in the Chattahoochee Basin.